Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can get all your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And today joining me are Paul Mahoney, founder of Nova Financial Group, author and public speaker. Welcome, Paul. Stephen. Joining Paul is John Howard, property developer, author and mentor.
Good day to you too.
Welcome to you.
Thank you.
I'm just thinking you recently did an exhibition here. In fact, both of you did, didn't you?
We've been working very hard. In fact, we've been London, Manchester. We've been all over. Bit of a double act.
We are privileged indeed. Okay. All right. Well, we'll get on with the questions. And John, I'm going to ask you first.
Okay.
I'm just about to purchase a flat in a recently converted office building in the heart of quite a large Midlands town. I'm quite sure that the builder has complied with all the necessary building regulations, etc. But are there any considerations I should take into account when purchasing in such a conversion? Are there any factors that may reduce the value of my property in the future?
Yes, there are. You've got to be careful. Permissive development is what it's called, and the government have brought this out. So any office building can be converted without planning permission. You get a license, you get the government, the local authority has a month in which to give you a certificate. But it doesn't mean you have to change the external look of it. If you go and want to change the external look, you have to get planning permission. So a lot of these developers are just buying these office buildings, converting them internally, but they still look like office buildings. It's a problem. One nickname is slums of the future, which I think is a bit harsh, to be fair, but I can understand where they're coming from. The other issue is if they're in a commercial area, which probably they are because they were offices, and it's a semi-industrial area, there is a problem with a number of the building societies and lending institutions lending on them when they're converted because they're arguing that they're in too much of a commercial area still. So you do have to be careful. You also want to make sure you've got a 10-year warranty on the building as well. So you have to be careful. If it looks really smart and lovely and it's in a residential-ish area, you're probably okay. If it looks like an office building still, and it is in a semi-commercial, spoke commercial area, or even worse, an industrial type area, you've got a problem.
I can also envisage problems with the conversion itself in a lot of cases. I've seen developers running out of money. You know, you hit problems like the floor depth is great to carry, you know, IT cables, that sort of thing. It's all got to be filled, it's all got to be properly finished.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing one at the moment which is 18 flats in Ipswich, which is a PD scheme. But, you know, we've put a lot of money effort into it to make sure it doesn't look like an office building anymore.
Are you able to get sort of pre-acceptance on mortgages for that type of property?
Yes, we have done. I always, before I start any development, I always make sure I've got a number of lenders who have committed in principle to lend on that development. Yeah.
Yeah,
always.
And do you suffer the same kind of restrictions that I've seen sometimes on residential buildings? You know, one lender will only take a certain percentage of the
absolutely.
building.
You get that all the time now, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But you just have to make sure you have enough of them that add up to the total. So,
yeah. Paul, any comments from that from a financial
Yeah, look,
point of
I
view?
agree with everything John said. A big thing to consider there is the location thing that you mentioned. And it's not just about where it is within a certain region or city. It's also what that region or city is. In that I've seen some problems with, you know, secondary regional towns where lenders won't touch them. Because I suppose those areas don't have the depth in the market that other areas might. So, you know, for example, if it's they said the Midlands, if it's a city centre development right in the centre of Birmingham, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because a lender can see that there's going to be rental demand and resale demand for that type of property. You know, if it's a more regional town in the Midlands, then I'd be more concerned about that, both from a mortgage perspective, but also a rental and a resale perspective.
But also, Paul, there are some nice towns, you know, some nice smaller towns, you know, which are quite upmarket. So it does depend.
Yeah, of course.
Paul, I'm interested there. So where would a lender accumulate that kind of data? Because I'm thinking, would they go to perhaps a normal credit reference agency where they'll say, well, I'm afraid in that town it's been depressed for a number of years, the bad debt ratio on credit cards, that sort of thing, is high. Is that the sort of consideration?
In my experience, it often comes down to the surveyor's comments and whether they see the demand existing there or not. Yeah. You're quite right so far as the exterior of the building quite often just being left, and that's a common comment that is brought up. Problem. It doesn't look like a residential building, and therefore are people actually going to want to live here? But again, that does depend on the location, because if it's central in a major city, people will live there regardless of what it looks like.
Yes.
Whereas if it's not, and there isn't that real requirement for this new supply in an area, then maybe they won't.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say, Steve, is I turn down a lot of PD schemes because they're either not in the right area or they're never going to look like a residential block. So people do need to be careful. There's been it's been so popular amongst developers and it's also amongst developers who are developing for the first or second time because they think it's easy and it isn't easy. I looked at one yesterday that's in financial trouble. They've asked me in to see if I want to buy it or do something with it. They're nearly finished it. And what they've done, they've developed 30 odd flats, but they're tiny. You're never going to sell them. They're too small to sell. So they've just got it wrong. So there are problems.
Yeah, okay. All right. Paul, moving on to your question. I recently got engaged and my partner and I wish to purchase our first home. The house we would like is available now. And if we purchased it immediately, it would probably be 12 months in advance of our planned wedding day. If we apply now for a joint mortgage, will we be at any disadvantage with the lenders as we're not yet married? I'm concerned that if we were to get a refusal, it may affect our chances of applying later, as our credit rating may be shown to have a refusal. Would it be a problem?
Okay, well, lots of first-time buyer questions lately. So far as them buying as a couple pre-marriage, so far as I know, that shouldn't affect their ability for a mortgage. It does affect things like stamp duty and subsequent purchase and all that sort of thing, but given they're going to get married quite shortly anyway, I don't think that's really a major...
What's the stamp duty implication?
As a married couple, you're considered one entity for the purposes of stamp duty. So for example, the buy-to-let stamp duty premium that's been brought into place. If I own a home in my name and my wife isn't on the title of the property, and she goes off and buys her own property, which is a second property as a couple, we would be liable for the extra 3%. 3%, even though she doesn't own, but because we're married, we're considered that one entity for that purpose. So that would be a consideration perhaps if they weren't planning to get married, but they are. So they're going to end up being that one entity in any case. So far as mortgages for couples who aren't married, lenders aren't really prejudiced in that way. I don't think they'll consider them as a couple in any case. So long as their personal situation stacks up and they can afford it, so far as I know, aren't really many considerations to be had there whether they're married or not.
No, as somebody whose company probably deals with these things all the time, would it be a sensible idea to buy so early in a relationship with a year to go?
We don't know if it's early, do we? They could have been together for 10 years.
Well, they're saying it's 12 months before they get married. So
you think that's a bit ambitious, Steve?
Well, I'm just, a lot of things can happen in 12 months,
the one thing Paul hasn't said is congratulations to them, because it's great to think that they're going to be a union as
we knew we could rely on you for that.
Well, there you go.
But what do you think, Paul? In terms of general advice, would you advise that early purchase, or would you say, hold tight and wait?
Well, as I said, we don't know whether it is an early purchase. Some people are together for 20 years before they get married in 1 year. They may have met 3 weeks ago, and if that's the case, then perhaps yes.
Wait a month or two.
But I don't think it's our job as a financial advisor to advise people on personal choices.
Good point. Yeah.
I think there's two sides to any decision, whether it's investment, property or otherwise, and that's personal and finances. We can advise on the numbers, we can advise on asset protection, all that sort of thing, But people are going to do what they want to do personally, and I think that's their choice.
Yes, okay. Anything to add, John?
Not really. As I said, good luck.
Perhaps they'll need it. you never know. Just talking about that, Paul, that sort of situation, are you finding any drop-off in sort of first-time buyers at the moment, or is it increasing, or is Brexit having a lot of effect on that?
I think there's obviously demand there from first-time buyers wanting to get onto the property market.
Just a natural demand.
Natural demand. I think things like Help to Buy are certainly helping with that, in that it's bringing down the amount of deposit required, which is a big thing, I'd say, for most young people or first-time buyers.
I think it's massive, especially in London. I mean, it's massive, isn't it?
Being able to save that deposit is a big barrier to entry. So when you consider the fact that there's also now stamp duty concessions for first-time buyers, I think that's up to 300 grand. You don't pay any stamp duty.
Is it only up to 300?
Only up to 300, and then over and above that, you pay a certain amount.
Okay.
So you still get some concession over 300.
You have to be a first-time buyer.
You know, for example, I saw a first-time buyer bought the other day. They paid just over 500 grand for the property, and the stamp duty was just over 15 grand. So it wasn't the usual for a £500,000 property.
Still tough
but in
to
that
find.
case, the developer was paying it for them.
Right.
So that brings down the cash in as well, and that makes a big difference when you think about it. You know, it's much better than a 15 grand discount off the property, because you're mortgaging the property 95%, or thereabouts. So these things are helping, but I also think that there's a bit of an attitude in the UK of sort of an entitlement to own, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. You know, if you grew up in a certain area, that doesn't mean that you're entitled to own a home in that area.
Well, it's a funny thing, isn't it? We're sort of getting a European attitude towards ownership, and yet we're coming out of Europe.
See, I don't think we have got a European.
You still think it's a strong desire?
I think there's in the UK, people have always have been told by their grandparents, their parents, you need to buy your own home, have your own independence. And for a lot of families, they're very proud of the fact they're the first generation to buy their own home. And I think we're unique in this country with the amount of building societies and people who will lend very high percentages at incredibly low interest rates at the moment. I think in the UK, home ownership is about 65%. It's been a bit high in the past. It's about 65%. It's lots more than anywhere else in Europe.
Okay. Well, look, that's all we've got time for in this half of the programme. Join us again after the break.
My name is John Howard, and I've been investing and developing properties for over 40 years. In that time, I've been very successful, but of course I've always made the odd mistake as well. In my book, I explain how to be successful and what to do should something go wrong. I've survived 3 property recessions. I can help you do the same. My book is available online. Please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialise in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial. Meet the Author is a brand new mini-series involving leading experts in the property industry, including mentors, developers, property lawyers, and other industry experts who share insightful stories about their journey and their books. Each book is compiled by authors with years of valuable experience, tips, and observations, providing you with new knowledge about the property industry. To find out more, visit the website property-tv.co.uk/library.
Hello and welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me are Paul Mahoney and John Howard. Welcome back, gents.
Thank you.
Paul.
Yes.
I'm purchasing my first property, which is a 1-bedroom flat in East London, for £450,000. I'm trying to appoint a solicitor to act for me, but I'm getting totally confused as to what is a reasonable price. I've been quoted prices of between £450 plus VAT and disbursements to £1,500 plus. My lender is offering a special conveyancing package with their solicitors of a straight £500. However, I've always been warned never to accept solicitors who may not be independent or impartial. Any advice, please?
All right. Well, yeah, which probably doesn't come as a surprise. I'm a big believer in paying fair value for good advice. I don't think you should go to the cheapest possible conveyancer, and I say that very strongly because in my experience, some conveyancers are terrible, and I'd say probably the majority of them aren't that great, because they do seem to be, through my experience, nothing against any conveyancers, but they do seem to be kind of the bottom end of the legal sort of.
Ooh,
that's
sure
just
my
that's
solicitor
just
will
my
love you.
experience. I'm not saying
go
that
on.
that's all of them, but
No, well.
certainly some of the conveyancers
Yeah.
I've dealt with haven't been very useful at all.
Well, I think the point there, just to clarify, a lot of conveyancers are not actually solicitors.
No, that's true.
So,
But that's not a crime because a conveyancer specialises in that field.
Yeah, but they do tend to overcommit their time, don't they, and then act on a very reactive
They do,
basis. I think that's.
So I suppose what
Paul's
I'm getting
getting
at is the cheaper ones are generally the lower end of the customer service sort of side of things as well. So you don't want that.
No.
You also don't want to overpay. And one thing to be conscious of is quite often a solicitor that we might recommend to a client. It's a real example actually. They include all disbursements and all fees in their quote.
Yeah.
And that makes them look very expensive when a client then goes and gets a quote online that only quotes the legal fee. So quite often the legal fee might be somewhere between £500 and £800. It's about the average sort of range just for the legal fee.
Yep.
But then you have disbursements, land registry,
Mortgage
whole
bits.
mortgages, a whole range, whether it's a limited company you're buying through, whole range of extras that go out on top of that. So you need to understand what those extras are because different solicitors charge different amounts for them. So understand that. So far as using if it's just for a mortgage, I'd say so far as using the conveyancer that the lender recommends probably isn't necessarily a bad thing. They do technically need to be independent regardless. Yeah. You are covered by their professional indemnity insurance. Yeah. So they can't, if they're representing you, quite often with mortgages there's dual representation. So they represent both you and the lender, but they are still supposed to be impartial to either side.
Okay.
So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. One thing I would say probably don't do is use a conveyancer that's tied in with a developer, because in some cases that can work fine, but in some cases they might be best mates with the developer.
Never.
Never.
That never happens, Paul. Never.
And therefore they may not always be fully acting in your best interests.
Okay.
There's a caveat to that though. I think there is slight benefit in using a conveyancer that is familiar with the developer.
Without question, because the speed.
And familiar with the development.
It might be for us, for instance, we might have 3 solicitors that we recommend because they've got all the paperwork, they've been through it all before. So actually, and we've negotiated a good fixed price with that solicitor. A few things, if I may, just add to what you said. You're absolutely right, Paul. A few things. Please do not pick an online solicitor you never see, because I think that's absolutely crazy. Second thing is make sure your solicitor is full-time, not part-time. Ask the question. Make sure she's not going on maternity leave. Make sure he's not going on paternity leave. Okay, because this is vitally important, this purchase. Biggest thing you've ever purchased, just probably, you'll use the lawyer for, hopefully. And you want to make sure it goes through smoothly. You don't want to be stressed and worried and not be able to get hold of the solicitor. You want it explained to you properly before you start the process as well.
And just to add to that, also I would say don't use in some cases for the same reasons. Don't necessarily use a one-man band.
No, absolutely.
Because if they get sick or if they go on annual leave, I've seen deals be delayed by over a month.
It's a disgrace.
Because their solicitor's gone on holidays.
It's disgraceful.
And any firm that you want to use, I would say you want to make sure they've got the resources to cover that person's seat.
I quite like the point you both really make about the sort of familiarity with the developer, in so much as that that solicitor is going to understand the lease, particularly if it's a leasehold property.
Yeah, I mean,
and that can be quite a complex and therefore expensive.
Yes, and once they've done that work once, they're only, it's repetition really. So that's how you get a decent price from these solicitors or lawyers or whatever you want to call them, conveyancers, because they've already done that process once, so they know the process is much quicker the second time and all the rest of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, John, we're going to move on to your question, and I better say at the outset, we no way direct this sort of question to your particular enterprise.
Are you going to be rude then? Is that what it is,
well,
Stephen?
No, but it's an inquisitive question.
Okay.
I recently went to a launch of a new development and had to join the queue to actually reserve an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
However, it became obvious talking to other people in the queue that a number of people had been employed by the developer to swell the numbers and make a bigger than truthful demand level. In the same way that putting false information in an advert, would this be an offence?
Right, well, of course it's an offence, and it's totally wrong. It reminds me of the early 90s when we did 2 blocks in West Brom, and we actually had people, you can't believe it now, Paul, we had people sleeping outside the block the night before. It's like the January sales, and we had queues right round to reserve a flat. And you cannot believe that. Now, mind, we had 140 to do, so it was quite a task. But they slept the night before in sleeping bags or in their cars to make sure they got one. Wouldn't that be great now? I mean, how things have changed, and the fact that someone has a queue of people looking to buy makes me very suspicious to start with. So, absolutely,
however,
they should be.
I'm going to add, John,
Yes.
that 25 years ago, when I was working down at Tower Bridge, I can remember purchasers fighting on Tower Bridge to get to the front of the queue to buy along those riverside
and
properties.
you won the fight clearly, Stephen.
Well,
so that was great.
that certainly did. Paul, have you ever come across this sort of thing? When
look, I think a lot of ththose sort of get-rich-quick scheme sort of type seminars that are often tied in with developers in some case.
Crazy, yeah.
And they hype people up, and they, whether they're hiring people to join the queue or
it's
just
totally
creating
wrong.
a hype around what they're selling when quite often there is no hype.
No, exactly.
It's all false.
Disgraceful behaviour. Really.
Definitely don't get caught up in that.
No.
There is obviously ways to determine if there is strong demand for a development, and quite often that should be fairly obvious by all of the factors that go into it. Yeah. So don't get caught up in that hype. Purchase based upon the fundamentals, and if it's a buy-to-let, obviously using those sort of buy-to-let fundamentals. If it's for yourself, then how much you really want it. But don't get caught up in that.
I think the other thing on that, I think we've probably all seen at these launches, the developer will have a firm of solicitors sitting in the office, ready to push you into exchanging, and I would strongly
I just think I can't believe these days that happens very much, if ever, these days, and I'll be incredibly suspicious if I see a queue of some for buying properties at the moment. I'll be very surprised.
Okay, gents, what I want to do now is actually throw the discussion open a little bit. We get a lot of questions coming in about how easy or otherwise it is to enter the world of development or move from one section of the industry to another. I wonder what your views on this are. I mean, how easy is it to become a developer?
Well, it's very interesting because, as you know, I've only been doing a lot of this for the last year. I've been a hard-nosed, if you like, property developer for 40-odd years. And it's very interesting. The people I'm attracting at the exhibitions that Paul and I do and different things are people who are probably experienced investors who are looking now because they're not getting the capital growth perhaps they were. They're looking to do something a little bit more exciting with their money and looking to develop maybe their existing properties to perhaps they've got roof spaces or something, or otherwise to go into development. A lot of them are looking at commercial to residential as if it's something new. Well, we were doing that in the 80s and we've been doing it ever since, but of course people were doing it in the 1920s as well, I'm sure, and earlier. So there's nothing new in property. What I would say, developing is very, very different to investing. It's riskier. You've got to know what you're doing, and if you haven't got that experience, you need some guidance and some mentoring or something to give you that, I believe, that confidence, not just to you, but also to the bank who you're going to be borrowing the money off. The bank aren't going to suddenly say, oh yes, we're going to let you develop these 8 flats if you know nothing about it. They're just not going to do it. Well, they will do it if it's an investment property.
Sure. Yeah. Cool.
And I agree with what John said there. I thought we would disagree on this
Good.
point. But I think the key point to what John said there that I agree with is experienced investors that have experience in property and now want to get a little bit more creative by, for example, going into property development. Far too many people we meet with are first-time buyers or have been hands-off landlords with no real experience or knowledge of property at all, and quite often don't have the money to develop, but even if they do, shouldn't necessarily think that developing property is an easy way to make money. You know, in my view, it's a profession. You know, it's something that John's been doing for 40 years. I'm sure after the first 4 months, John didn't have the knowledge that he has now. And that person won't either. So they shouldn't rush into these things because they've watched some other TV shows which make it look very easy, and just assume that buying a rundown property, doing some work to it and flipping it a few weeks later is going to make you loads of money, because that's not the case.
I think also, Paul, if I may say so, I agree with everything you're saying there, which is not always the case, but I do on this occasion. And that is that if the market is rising, some of these people who get into developing get out of jail because the market is risen.
Shooting up,
Which, you've got to assume that never happens, and that it's a flat market. And that actually you've got to get your build. The biggest mistakes I see everybody making is they underestimate the building work and they underestimate the time it's going to take to do it. And so they underestimate the sale, to sell them, which means they underestimate the interest they're paying and the fact that they can't go on and do the next deal sooner. So it's very common. They're all very, very common problems.
Okay, all right. Well, that's all we've got time for in today's show. Gents, Paul Mahoney, John Howard, thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you for joining us. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialise in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial.
Hi, I'm John Howard and I'm known as the property expert. The reason for this is over the last 40 odd years, I've bought and sold over 3,500 properties and I'm still going. I'm delighted to pass on my vast experience and knowledge to you through my property seminars that are taking place across the UK this year. To know more, please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
The tax system has evolved significantly over recent years for property investors and developers. You may think that you and your accountant have a grip on these changes. However, unless you are receiving specialist tax advice from a specialist tax advisory firm, then it's unlikely to be the case. At ETC Tax, our team of highly experienced chartered tax advisors work with private individuals and companies to deliver effective tax planning whilst meeting HMRC compliance requirements. Let us help you to meet your personal or commercial objectives in the most tax efficient manner. ETC Tax, making the complex simple.
Investing in property and building a portfolio can be easy with the right support and service. From property sourcing to selection and financing, through to refurbishment, vetting and letting. Michelle Niziel's bespoke property investment service does all the hard work so you don't have to. Let Michelle take care of all the headaches while you relax and earn stress-free profit. Contact her now to find out how easy it really can be.